Guys, you're just walking down a typical street in California. It's not that big a deal, really. This week, we opened actually not with our usual cast, but rather the denizens of hell with the 68ers. And as it turned out, they were also in death, not as bad as Abitos, but they probably could have gone without the office that legit seemed to be modeled after ones used by the Yakuza. To make matters worse, most of the banks had already blacklisted them from applying for loans. Hey, if you want to move out here, you can apply for a loan on a house, even if you have a mile-long rap sheet. Back with our main cast of perpetually broke girls, they just barely managed to pay off their interest for the month, notably in cash, as if this company wasn't already shady as all hell. At the same time, the shells that they had been examining from the previous episode had traced back to the black market, leading to some interesting world-building conversations, including how other student consuls and clubs like the 68ers had frequented them, and some possible conspiracies behind them. Thus, the foreclosure task force decided to scope things out for themselves. Sure enough, trouble found them when some wannabe gangsters tried to extort some rich girl. Fortunately, she was saved by our leads who have actual faces and introduced herself to them. If worse had come to worse, you could have just come back as a zombie or a vampire. She was a student from Trinity Academy, obviously bringing up some heavenly motifs versus all of our hell-themed characters so far. That said, she was able to get along with our girls from the City of the Dead, who were a little too interested in stuff that they were selling on those streets. No, this innocent little girl was more interested in asphyxiating chickens, which, okay, maybe the poison gas isn't all that bad. Anyway, through her, they, and by extension us the audience, were able to learn more about this lawless area that of course also happened to be full of some very shady loan sharks. Thus Hoshino very kindly asked Hifumi to help them dig up some more intel about them. She then literally pointed out the shadiest money loaners in the city with a bank called the Black Market Bank because subtlety in this show is for losers. Too easy. And of course, the loan company Abitos was borrowing from was one of their regulars, even seemingly depositing the money they just paid. Hifumi further became Little Miss Exposition when she informed them about the Kaiser group that headed them, as well as several other rather illicit companies and practices. Again, the whole paying them in trailless cash probably should have been a big clue in hindsight. Thus, they of course wanted to bust them to help them get out of debt, but they would need evidence such as the bank records, which of course they weren't just going to hand over willingly, so...
Let's rob a bank!
And even though she had already done way more than enough for these chicks, Hifumi was unfortunately dragged into this little Power Rangers-esque charade. And as it just so happened, the 68ers were trying to get a loan from that same bank, but even they weren't shady enough to try and take advantage of these constantly broke losers. This got Aru to consider perpetrating her own robbery, but being the legit good girl that she wasn't willing to go through with it. This resulted in an actually really nice moment where we got to learn a little bit more about her backstory and how her whole being a quote-unquote hard-boiled criminal was just an act to hide the fact that she was actually a kind and still a rather meek and precious girl who really should just put the glasses back on. Fortunately for her, our main heroines were going to teach her how to get it done, ignoring the fact that they were still wearing their very recognizable school uniforms and, oh yeah, their name tags. Then again, I guess they could have said that they were stolen.
This is a bank robbery! Annika!
Though I also wonder if they could use their halos as a form of fingerprinting, because if that's the case, then they were pretty much doomed from the start. Anyway, they also just decided to make Hifumi the leader of this little operation. Hey, at least you're relatively one of the less convoluted characters in that mess of a franchise. But yeah, this whole scene was just a riot in terms of how horribly they were actually executing it, and yet Aru, through the rosiest of glasses, only saw them as being on Ocean's 11 levels of competent criminals, when really they were more like that one really bad episode of Rick and Morty that had Elon Musk in it for whatever reason. Regardless, the cowardly robot tellers gave them the goods, and they made a successful escape. However, I guess the teller wasn't listening when Blue 2 told them that they only wanted the records. Then again, maybe he did on purpose.
早く持って帰ろう。
セリカ、ちょっと待って。
何？
Serika, have you ever heard of a little something called marked bills? But yeah, I think they kind of needlessly put in this bit of them considering taking the money too. I mean, I get what they are trying to do here by bringing out more morally gray areas that come from stealing from legit bad people. They even cleared up my previous questions on why they weren't having Nonomi at least foot some of their school's bills by pointing out how they should be earning their own money. I actually like this sort of stuff, but it does feel a little out of place in an episode like this, and just a tad bit too preachy and Sunday morning-ish rather than Sunday night when this actually airs. Nothing too bad, just a little out of place, and also why does the show insist on making Serika look bad? Anyway, Aru caught up with them just to unknowingly fangirl over her former adversaries. Not that Nonomi and Hoshino were more than willing to play along by both naming themselves the masked swimsuit gang, even though they weren't wearing bikinis, and also state their modus operandi.
我が道のごとく魔境を行く。これが私らのモットーだよ。
Yeah, Hoshino, even as a JoJo fan, I can admit memes like that have long since overstayed their welcome. Still, it worked on this cute little idiot, and they even left her with the likely marked bills. And with that, the episode ended with her friends finally revealing that Santa Claus doesn't exist. This was a pretty damn hilarious episode, with some pretty good world building to go with it. Yeah, normally, you wouldn't really expect these two things to go hand in hand. I mean, it's not impossible, and yet here, it never really felt too out of place, and just flowed nicely from one scene to the next. Helps that they also gave us more of Aru and her backstory, which really should just qualify as an A+ automatically. As I said previously, I knew this heist episode was coming, and was just looking forward to how goofy the characters would look in their cheap disguises. This episode certainly did not disappoint in that aspect, especially with everyone just being so damn gung-ho, and yet way too casual over committing a serious crime. That said, I also wasn't expecting to get as much interesting world building as we got here. And while some of it, like Kaiserloans turning out to be a bunch of sharks, was just being affirmed, it was still interesting to see how much a black market would affect a world like this, where cute girls with guns were just an everyday occurrence. It honestly just makes sense that there would be a lot of shady businesses like them, and the bank that does make this desert world feel actually lived in. Along with that, we also got some good character building. Obviously, getting to know Faust-chan and seeing her getting dragged into the foreclosure task force antics was a lot of fun. But low-key, I would say the real star of this episode was, yet again, Aru. Her determination, especially after we learned a little bit more about her backstory, did make her rather endearing. And of course, her thinking the masked swimsuit gang were a bunch of badass criminals was just hilarious. All of this was making both schools all the more endearing, and through their antics, they were unknowingly getting closer, while digging up some intriguing bits of lore and conspiracy, as it is clear that the shadiness of the banks and loaners were going to play into something much bigger later on. My only complaints with this episode were more nitpicks at the very end that I did like in some ways, and just found them talking about morality at that point in the episode just felt a little out of place was all. Regardless, between one of the most chill and hilarious bank robberies ever, and Aru becoming a good contender for Best Girl, this is overall probably the most entertaining episode of this season so far. While our main girls are still very much in depth, I would say they were more than paying their dues in terms of getting me to laugh after a long week. Thank you as always for watching, and be sure to check out some of our other videos on this channel. Probably within the next 2 weeks, we'll drop a review for the first Precure Max Heart movie, which isn't the controversial one, though it is also not much else, but more on that in the actual review. So, look forward to it. And until then, though, farewell for now, my friends, and... yeah, dude, you're facing the wrong way. Yeah, that's it. Completely turn around. Now just walk forward. Keep going, keep going. Eventually you'll reach that teller.